two schools that the Big Ten and the SEC are targeting. Okay, if you ask me this without having read the story and meeting Caleb during our 3:15 a.m. production meeting, I would say that it would be Notre Dame and North Carolina. If you had asked me that before this story came out, and please credit the story, but it is actually who, Caleb Calhoun?
Well, before I get to it, the story is Pete Thamel on ESPN. I encourage everybody to read it. It's about conference realignment negotiations. They are kind of fighting over Notre Dame, but both conferences are determining it's not worth the fight right now because as of right now, Notre Dame has no interest in being a permanent member of a conference still. So
Sure.
In place of that, they are both allegedly fighting over Virginia because the SEC is going to take Florida State and Clemson if they can. They would do that in a heartbeat. They don't. Another report came out. They have no interest in Miami. Just Florida State and Clemson. Those are the only two schools in a market that already exists that they're interested in a market that they are already part of. So new market schools that they would be interested in, both conferences are Virginia and North Carolina. It shocked me a little bit because I thought they would be more interested in Virginia Tech than Virginia. But I guess maybe Virginia gets them into maybe they are thinking television markets at that point because Virginia, I think, gets them into the DC market, and I don't think Virginia Tech does.
Let me ask the message board, because today's tough question is which opponent would you most want to see join the SEC? I'm going to say Notre Dame because I think it would be so impactful and be kind of like a middle finger to the Big Ten. But realistically, I would say either Clemson or Florida State, just because I like the quality of play, and I think they're most likely to be good 5-10 years. I do know that the SEC really likes North Carolina. So I'll ask you today's tough question. If there were just one school that could be added to the conference, who would it be? And it's brought to you by Andy Mason, AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Save thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on your real estate transaction and know that you have the best service and you have the absolute best prices in the biz. AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Travis says, why would you want Virginia? I'm kind of the same way. I don't see the Virginia thing. Who do you want on the message board? Ronald says we need Texas to be a real UT game to be a permanent opponent. They're in the conference. I don't think they're going to be a permanent opponent. But who would you most like to see? I'll say Notre Dame. I'll kind of fall on the sword because I don't think it's going to happen. But if it's Dave's world, if Dave's the NCAA commissioner or president and not a buffoon, I could have done such a better job than Mark Emmert, for the record. But I would say Notre Dame would be the one, but I know that's not doable. So who would you say if we're in fantasy land? You could take Oregon State if you wanted to, Caleb.
See, I would want somebody the SEC doesn't want. I want Virginia Tech. I think that's a natural SEC school. That should be a rivalry with Tennessee. It'd be such an exciting rivalry, Tennessee and Virginia Tech every year. And honestly, my hope is that Virginia Tech goes to the SEC instead of Virginia. I think the SEC has a long-term goal to have a geographical footprint in every state of the old Confederacy, shall we say. And North Carolina and Virginia is all they got left. And I'd rather have Virginia Tech than Virginia, but yeah, so I'm going Virginia Tech.
To the message board, Clemson should be the one. Okay, so that is the team, hands down, that would help Tennessee the most if they were in the SEC. And I believe that, and you gave me a look, Caleb, I believe that because you would split up the state of South Carolina in recruiting. I know you're looking at me weird, but I believe that would help Tennessee the most out of all the schools we're talking about. I don't think any helps tremendously because suddenly you have the panache of being in the SEC. But which school, what do you think about Clemson taking? Which school would help Tennessee specifically the most?
Which school would help Tennessee?
I know you don't think it's Clemson, so you can go ahead and blast me right now.
No, I don't, because I think Clemson and South Carolina already split because South Carolina is in the SEC, but Clemson is the power school. Honestly, if Clemson joins the SEC, that just sends South Carolina into irrelevancy. I mean, it's Clemson State at that point, and they'll have a lot on it.
But South Carolina is relevant right now when they recruit against Tennessee. So wouldn't it be nice
because South Carolina's in the SEC? Yeah, so you're saying you want Tennessee to have to compete with Clemson and South Carolina?
Well, here are my thoughts on Clemson. So I'll go a little deeper before you and Tracy Morgan say,
that's crazy.
I I don't believe Clemson is going to be a championship contender long term. I think it's kind of like a Miami. Miami's had their ebbs and flows, but their down times have been decades plus. And I think that Dabo Sweeney was the perfect fit there whenever he hangs it up. And I'm looking 5-7 years down the road. I think that there's going to be a vast gaping hole in Clemson. And at that point, I think Tennessee will be able to take advantage and other schools recruiting that area. But
Well,
you say no.
Clemson being in the SEC still makes that area a little bit harder to recruit than it would if they weren't in the SEC. But what I would say is I think Florida State helps Tennessee the most because Tennessee doesn't recruit the Florida Panhandle, really. That's not a pipeline for Tennessee. Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and Auburn all recruit the Florida Panhandle. If Florida State joins, that waters down the talent for all of those schools that are in competition with Tennessee. And Tennessee doesn't lose a recruiting pipeline.
Interesting. Okay, so what school would most help Tennessee if they come into the conference? I think Notre Dame. I'm not trying to harp on Notre Dame.
Florida State was when I said would most help Tennessee.
Wouldn't Notre Dame most help everybody in the conference? Because then you would separate yourself from the Big Ten or anybody, right? If they if the SEC hasn't already, if they added Notre Dame, that would be a whole nother level. Caleb, you are the premier conference. If anybody argued that before, the argument's over, right?
The only thing that would hurt is so Notre Dame is the one national recruiting school there is. Notre Dame is the one school that they don't have a direct pipeline, but they can go all over the country. They can go to California, they can go to Miami, wherever, and they can compete with the local schools, with the exception of LSU, because like we said, nobody leaves Louisiana. If they're in the SEC and they're flying to Georgia or South Carolina, all of a sudden their competition with Tennessee for some of those recruits gets a little bit tougher for Tennessee.
Okay, as far as the teams that can win championships, the top half of the SEC, is there any other school they would want to add at all?
As far as teams that would be able to join the top half if they were added to the SEC?
Well, I mean, you're basically making it more difficult. So the Alabamas, the Georgias, would you just as soon it stay status quo? Like Texas and Oklahoma, you're done. Do you really want to add anybody else?
I mean, I think they do. Again, Virginia and North Carolina schools aren't going to be a threat to that well-being. That's just adding new markets. So I think they would love a Virginia and North Carolina school. I'm going to tell you this right now. Sorry, SEC fans. Virginia and North Carolina, if the Big Ten or the SEC offers in hand, you're taking the Big Ten offer. They're better run right now than the SEC, and your payout's going to be better if you join the Big Ten. Just is.
I just wouldn't make it off a short-term decision. I think I know you like the television contract a lot, but I don't think that's going to be that would not be in the top 3 of my decisions.
It's not just television contract. It is partially television contract. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's a research institution. More UNC and Virginia are both AAU schools, so they are actually research-first schools. So there's the academic side that they care about, that the Big Ten cares about, that the SEC doesn't. Not saying the SEC is stupid or anything. I'm just saying that's not a priority with the SEC with how they corral schools. So UNC and Virginia is going to get research funding that they wouldn't get otherwise in the SEC. So that's a big deal. And also, you can less competition too long term if you're trying to build a powerhouse program. Yep. I mean,
couple of notes from the message board. Notre Dame would get exposed if they join the SEC and would become mediocre in 3 years. I'm not going to go that far, but they would not. They would definitely be on that second tier behind what Georgia and Alabama have done over the past decade, and Georgia past few years.
They're on that second tier now.
They are. I mean, when we talk about going to get Notre Dame, when I talk about that's the most coveted team, I'm saying that based off of tradition. If Notre Dame doesn't up their game and relax some of the coaching restrictions they have and restraints, then they're not going to ever be relevant like a Georgia or Alabama, or even the way they were back in the day. Or you want to take a Southern California, or you want to throw those old school teams that were super relevant back in the day. They're never going to be that again. They would have to change their game. And if they're not willing to do so, the SEC should say no, or the Big Ten should say no. mean, people
Yes,
don't realize that Notre Dame, you have no say in academic requirements as far as everybody bends rules to get guys in, and you have no say in discipline, and you have to live in the dorm your whole time there as an athlete. Those are three big, big strikes against you when you're trying to put together an elite football program. Huge, monstrous strikes, Caleb.
Oh, yeah. Notre Dame is the one school, and I'm not saying this is a good thing. They're the one school when schools fight over whose school has more integrity or whose school is this. Notre Dame's the one school that can literally say they have more integrity and they care about academics. No other school with college football does, but it's to Notre Dame's detriment. And as long as Notre Dame continues to slide the way they are, I mean, at some point, all the fans that remember the greatness of Notre Dame, they're not going to be around anymore. I mean, yeah, I don't want to say that, but that's just
No, it's true. My
nature of the
18-year-old
business.
son doesn't view Tennessee as being great.
Yeah.
And
So
and right, and that's just 18. That can change, but at some point, viewing Notre Dame as an elite program is going to go away, and it's going to be viewed as what would be a good comparison? A Stanford, a Northwestern, a Vanderbilt that kind of has that academic reputation, but is not an elite football program.